Hello, I'm Leon Fink, a labor historian from the Kalmanovitz Initiative for Labor and the Working Poor at Georgetown University. And I'd like to welcome you to this international Zoom webinar on labor in Ukraine, solidarity in a time of war. We'll begin in another minute as we let everyone into the webinar. We're going to begin in about 20 seconds. Okay, welcome again, everyone. This is the international Zoom webinar on labor in Ukraine, solidarity in a time of war. Since the Russian invasion began on February 24th, the war in Ukraine has captured our attention and emotions. Yet if daily media coverage has allowed us to follow the military trajectory of the war, including the terrible toll taken on Ukrainian civilians and their cities, as well as the forced migration of millions to havens outside the country, other important aspects of Ukrainian life and institutions have gone largely unreported. Today, we focus on the labor front. Ukrainian trade unions and their international labor allies are in many ways at the center of the current national struggle for survival. To explore this issue, we are lucky to have 4 expert panelists from inside and outside Ukraine to begin the discussion. Our 4 panelists include John Al Hozinski, the Senior Program Officer for Eastern Europe and Ukraine from the Solidarity Center, which is the US's largest labor rights organization with staff in some 60 countries across the globe. In addition, Ivana Hrabko, chairwoman of the Youth Council of the Federation of Trade Unions of Ukraine, the largest Ukrainian labor organization in the country. Third, George Sandul, the legal director of Labor Initiatives, an NGO which since 2014 has been at the center of fighting for labor rights in Ukraine. And finally, Kathy Feingold, Deputy President of the International Trade Union Confederation and the AFL-CIO's International Affairs Director. Again, I'm Leon Fink, the moderator from the Kalmanovitz Institute at Georgetown University. All right, we're going to begin with a comment from John Al Hozinski. And I've asked him to give us a brief overview of the role of the Solidarity Center and a little bit about the Ukrainian trade union movement. Thanks, Al.
Thanks, Leon. I appreciate it and appreciate the invite to this webinar. And we're very excited that you're hosting this. Thank you to everybody at Kalmanovitz. Just as Leon noted, I work at the Solidarity Center. My name is Al Hozinski. I'm a senior program officer for Europe and Central Asia, and I cover the countries of Ukraine, Belarus, Moldova, and Georgia. As Leon mentioned, we are the largest US-based worker rights development organization. We work in about 60 countries. We work with over 900 partners around the world, and we are an allied organization of the AFL-CIO. In Europe, we have 6 country offices: Serbia, Albania, Ukraine, Armenia, Georgia, and Kyrgyzstan, and those countries cover altogether about 13 countries in total. So I just want to talk a little bit about our program in Ukraine. We've been working in Ukraine for well over 2 decades, supporting programs there, supporting labor rights promotion programs. I'm going to share my screen and just give you kind of a little snapshot of what we were doing, the Solidarity Center was doing in Ukraine as of, say, mid-February, to give you a sense of what our program looked like. Let me share my screen here. So if you can see my screen, you can see that our work in Kyiv, in the capital, we support our Solidarity Center office, and we also support the work of labor initiatives, who we've mentioned. George Sandul, the legal director of Labor Initiatives, is here with us. Labor Initiatives is a pro-union think tank and legal aid center with an office in Kyiv, as well as in the eastern Ukrainian town of Dobropila in the Donbass region, which is sort of a right on the contact line right now. It's in an area that is under siege at the current moment. I'm not going to go into too much detail on these. You can sort of see it on the screen, but these are the issues that as of mid-February, before we paused our program due to the war, these are things that we were working on. Legal rights consultations for unions and workers, case support, legal case support, organizing support for a new generation of organizers in Ukraine. And you can see some of our statistics there that we were able to report on and were able to cover just before the war began. We work on gender equality, promoting gender equality in both within unions and within the workplace broadly within Ukraine. Youth activism. I'm very happy to see Ivana here today speaking. She's one of a good example of the new youth activists, new generation of labor leaders that we have been training and been working with to promote and to give them the skills they need to lead the labor movement in Ukraine into the next decades. Anti-corruption, working with unions, particularly on whistleblower protection, not only on the implementation of whistleblower protection laws, but actually on legal cases to help whistleblowers. And then just some of the trends that we were working on before the war began, to sort of show you the things that we were looking at, that our partners in Ukraine were looking at. We were looking at this sort of multi-decade effort by various successive Ukrainian governments to weaken labor laws in the country. This is something that's been going on, I would say, since the time of independence, this question over labor protection and worker rights in the country. We're doing a lot of work now. Continually are doing a lot of work with gig workers. You see the rise of the platform economy, the gig economy. This is not just Ukraine, this is worldwide. It's an issue in the entire region, in the Eastern Europe and the post-Soviet space, the rise of these new forms of platform work. We've been working very closely with organizers, with a lot of companies you'll know, Bolt and Glovo and other these global sort of gig economy companies, to promote worker rights and to promote the rights of these careers, as well as people like day laborers. The IT sector is another area where the platform model is taking off and that we're working on. Occupational safety and health is a big issue in the region. Certainly we're looking at that in Ukraine on improving the occupational safety and health standards. Migrant rights. Before the war began, we were working on ideas around migrant rights for Ukrainians who are migrating to places like Poland. Now it's an even bigger issue now, of course, with the refugee crisis, with this sort of massive exodus. So that's going to be something that we're going to be working on in the future. And then, of course, the green economy and just transition. Ukraine is a coal-producing country, particularly in the east, in the Donbass. And that's something that we have been working with in these mining communities in that region, again, as of, say, February 2022, before the war began. Just a quick overview of the Ukrainian labor movement. There are two main trade union federations: the Federation of Trade Unions of Ukraine, called the FPU, of which one of our panelists, Ivana, is a member, and then the Confederation of Free Trade Unions, KVPU, which is a smaller organization. The FPU has its origins in the Soviet era, and since independence has had to adapt to sort of the post-Soviet economy and the post-Soviet space, that space. And then the KVPU has its origins in the sort of the late Soviet period, early independence period. It primarily was based or was originated out of the miners unions and miners unions movements in the late 80s and 1990s. There are some other unions in Ukraine to note. The All Ukrainian Union of Worker Solidarity, VOST, is a smaller federation. We have worked with them in the past. We generally don't have a lot of programs with them, but they are in Ukraine. They're active, but although a bit much smaller union federation. Two sets of unions that I want to mention is the Nova Poshta trade union. Nova Poshta is like the largest logistics company in Ukraine. It's like the Ukrainian UPS. And about 6 years ago, they had a union organizing drive, really an innovative and kind of a model, we think, for organizing, for workplace organizing in Ukraine. Currently, they have about 14,000 members. They're independent. They're not affiliated with either the FPU, KVPU, or VOST, with any of the federations in Ukraine. And they achieved their first CBA in 2016, and they are very active presently in the war effort and moving logistics and logistical support for the humanitarian effort. So I'll make a note of them. And then, of course, I mentioned earlier, something we were working on is the gig economy. And we mentioned even before the webinar began that the gig economy workers are still active even during the war. They're obviously moving humanitarian aid. And today there was even a bit of a protest in Lviv by these workers around workplace issues. But some trends: the global workers sought to unionize in 2019, and then there was a big bulk courier strike, for example, in September and October just last year. So these are sort of new organizing efforts that we've been able to support at the Solidarity Center as of, let me stop sharing my screen here, as of the, sorry, I apologize, as of the sort of the beginning of February, mid-February. So that's kind of an overview. I'm not going to take too much time because I want our partners to be able to speak. They're the real heroes here. And they've been just fantastic in the work that they've been doing to transition from what I've shown here, this sort of work, this sort of standard union and worker rights development work, to now an effort to really build and support the humanitarian effort in Ukraine. So I'm going to stop here and turn it back over to you, Leon. Thank you.
Thanks, Al. That's a good start. If I could just follow up on a couple of your points. You mentioned that the Solidarity Center and its affiliates were involved in the theme of anti-corruption in the years before the war. Could you elaborate a little? What's the nature of corruption as it affects the union movement? What were the biggest problems, say, before the war started?
George, I'm going to hand that over to you because you are the expert on that.
Right. Okay, well, we're going to get to George. If you're going to talk about that, George, shall we save that?
No problems. I will incorporate in my speech.
Yeah.
I will give like 1 minute of this. Yeah.
Okay, great. And well, one other thing, Al, would you say that the divisions, from what you can see in these two large federations, as well as any other ones, have they gone away with the war? Is everybody basically fighting on the same ground, or those divisions still, or they still affect the response?
You know, that's a good question. And there's a tremendous amount of unity. There's a tremendous, and both of these federations cooperated quite a bit before the war. I don't mean to say, I mean, there certainly are differences in the two main federations. They certainly have their differences and their sort of different approach to things, but they cooperated quite a bit before the war. And there's been a tremendous amount of unity between the two. they've issued a number of joint statements is in support of the sort of the war effort and calling for international support. They both have transitioned to a major humanitarian lift that we're going to talk to a little bit. So it's been notable. People have talked about Ukraine being one big union, and that not only have unions come together themselves, but as part of a larger trend of society itself rallying around the effort. So I think that it's been notable the amount of cooperation between these two federations.
Okay, thanks a lot, Al. All right, we're going to turn the floor over to Ivana Hrabko, who's the chairwoman of the Youth Council of the largest federation of unions, the FPU. Ivana, can you tell us a little how you see how the trade unions in Ukraine, FPU perhaps in particular, how has your work changed since the beginnings of the wider war?
Hi, everyone. Yes, I can tell about how our work changed during this war, and I want to share my screen and show you a presentation, but I think I have some problem with it. I'm sorry. Maybe Leonid can help me with it.
Ivana, if you want, you can send it to me as well and I can share it, or you can press the green button at the bottom of the screen to share.
Yeah. On desktop. Maybe I can do it. Maybe I send to you this presentation. Yes, and I'm so sorry for this.
Don't worry, we have time.
Or Ivana, if you want to send it to Laura Gutierrez or Lily, you can, and they can share it for you.
Oh, sorry.
Or I never share anything or have any visuals, so you can also just start telling us a little what it's like. Ivana is in Kyiv, as is George, so we're very happy that you could even join with us, and so we're very interested in just what your daily work is like in this situation.
So when we wait for my presentation, I can start to speak. So when this war started, I was in Kyiv because I work in the State and Police Union of Ukraine, and one of my main tasks in this time was that I helped my friend to leave Kyiv, because when the war started, it was very dangerous in Kyiv, and she had the daughter, 1-year daughter. So we moved on from Kyiv to Chernivtsi. It was very dangerous, but we arrived in Chernivtsi, and when this shock stopped, we start to think what we can do and how we can work in this wartime. And as you mentioned, I'm the head of the youth network of Federation of Trade Union. And we have very great network and connection through all of our country. And we texted all the time. It was like 24 hours per day. And we try to connect each other and ask every time how we feel, and we ask which help we need. So the first what we started to do, it was that we help people who need to leave, for example, the eastern region of Ukraine or Kyiv or some or different cities which were attacked by Russia. They try to find some safe place in the west of Ukraine. So we start with it, that we help people to leave these dangerous places. But as Al mentioned, that during a lot of years, we work together with Solidarity Center, with FLCIO, and this youth network, which we have now, it's like a result of this very great work and all of our webinars and trainings which we had. Because in wartime, when some our trade union, some our national wide union have a problem and they struggle with some bureaucracy, we start to work, and without this struggle with bureaucracy, and we was like the cornerstone of our trade union lifeline. Because when I was in Chernivtsi, I met with one of my friend, Volodymyr, and he had and he worked with very big volunteer center in Chernivtsi. And we never did this work like volunteers work, because we work with labor rights, with trade union work, and for me it was like new experience. So I met with Volodymyr, and he shared for me this experience. How do these volunteers work, and how provide humanitarian aid to different cities. So we decided to together with our colleagues from Kyiv Regional Trade Union and with NGO Labor Initiative, we decided to create our trade union lifeline. And now it's like one of the greatest example how trade union help people, help our members. So we started work in Chernivtsi. But also we have very great cooperation with our friends from trade union, friends from railway trade union. So when we start to collect this humanitarian aid, we need to find a way how we can deliver this aid to different cities. And one of the best way was like using the train. And we decided to move on our like very small volunteers work from Chernivtsi to Kyiv, and it's very great that we can use and work in office of NGO Labor Initiative. And yes, we start to do this work here, and now you can see all of these boxes which are now in our office. So we collected very different kind of aid because our members who lost some, I don't know, some basic stuff for living, they need this support. So we start to collect this different kind of aid, for example, like food, clothes, medicine, but for us, it's very important that we know like concrete requests from people. So if we have a very great network around our country, we contact with our members, our trade union comrades from different regions of Ukraine, and it helps us to know this direct request from people, and also this help us to deliver this aid from Kyiv to to concrete city. For example, we help a lot, I think, because we provide our humanitarian aid to, for example, to Sumy, to Poltava, to Mykolaiv, where, and maybe you know that in Mykolaiv now there is very difficult military situation. Also, we help our members, our comrades from Borodyanka region, Borodyanka and Bucha region. It's near a city and villages near Kyiv, and I think it's one of great way show how a trade union in this very difficult time help people. But it's not this providing this humanitarian aid. It's not only work which we're doing now. Also, we created a lot of statement to European leaders, not European, to all a lot of country in our world, and we talk about supporting our country. About we try to tell in true about war. And we created this video with some of my comrades from our youth network. For example, it was people from Kharkiv, from Mykolaiv, from Zhytomyr, from Chernihiv, from Kherson, before Kherson was occupied. So it was very great way to tell the truth about war to people in all world. And also, I think it's great work because we created also video statement from our comrades from nuclear trade union, especially when it was very difficult situation in Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. And in our country now there are like 4 nuclear power plants. So we made 4 video statement for support our comrades in Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. And also one of the great work was when our students from education trade union also create a video statement and telling their story about war and how change their life. So also we try to do some actions, and before Easter we doing very great and warm action in our train station in Kyiv. It was it named like Easter spirit go to the east. So we in one of hall in Kyiv train station, we work with children and mother who was in a train station in this time, and we making like Easter postcards for our soldier in the east. But also in this action, we one of great family from a village Bobrik, it's near Chernihiv. They back for us like Easter bread, and we deliver this bread also to our soldier and to some elderly people. Before the East, it was also like our, I don't know, like our very warm action, and we want to show how young trade union members, young trade unionists, what they can do in wartime. And also it was like one of interesting initiative. We help our group from railway trade union to evacuate people from some of East region, and we moved with them to Slavyansk region and help evacuate people. So we buying some kind of aid for these people and help them in all of road from this place.
Thanks, Ivana. Ivana, I'd like to come back to you. Thanks very much for this kind of grassroots version of what it feels, what the unions are actually doing on the ground. Let me just switch for the moment, though, to George Sandul, the Director of Labor Initiatives, the NGO, which was very involved with labor law reform. George, what's the role for labor rights? What's the relevance of labor rights in the midst of a war?
Yeah, thanks, Leon. And you mentioned that you're a labor historian, and you know probably some of the brightest moments of the labor history. I like to read, like, you know, books from 19th century and so on. But some of the brightest moments are right now in Ukraine, I suppose, because of people like Ivana, like other union leaders. And you know, about the role of the labor rights, Al already mentioned about all the solidarity programs in Ukraine, like, and we're basically sitting in the solidarity office, solidarity center office here in Kyiv. And we tried to emphasize before the war that labor rights, it's not just like, haha, like something not important, but to switch this discourse, for the respect of the labor rights, because it's vital for you, and unions are vital. Unions were vital before the war, like, because you will have a slice of bread and so on and so on. During the war, unions, as Ivanka mentioned, they switched to the humanitarian aid. So if you have this strong grassroots connections, you will win, or at least you will survive. So labor rights and labor connections are just vital for survival. And we saw that before the war and during the war, the unions are the most genuine, organic, and biggest group of the civil society. So it's natural they are helping their people. And about work during the war, like, okay, it was great shock. Everybody expected it, but we hope that it won't happen. But it's very easy for the union people, for the labor rights activists, was to act, because if you have some core values like solidarity, justice, and so on, you will derive your actions from it, and then you're seeking the ways to implement your core values of the solidarity. That's why Solidarity Center here, labor initiatives and so on, were involved in humanitarian aid, and our office. You may see all those boxes on the background of Ivanka, like it's what we will send somewhere. But it's one point that we need to help somebody here and now. But also we're trying to transform and reform our work during the war, following our principles and our kind of basic program goals. Because, for example, like Al mentioned corruption, and you, Leon, asked about corruption and about whistleblowers. You know about this linkage about unions and corruption, better to say anti-corruption. Very often people from unions become the whistleblowers about corruption, large-scale corruption, and so on. They're trying to help this state, yeah, you know, on the voluntary basis. They're exposing corruption, they facing sometimes physical beatings or retaliation on the workplace. And we see it even now, because problems didn't vanishing even during the war with corruption. And one of our famous whistleblowers also that was mentioned, Alena Babeshka, she was fired a few days ago. We're now trying to fight for her. So unions were the crucial part of the civil society, and we tried to deliver it for years. And you know, now it's very hard to argue that, oh, we should get rid of unions, it's something Soviet and so on. And now we're jumping to the other topics, other topic of the labor reform, in course of which these theses were listening. Unfortunately, some of the lobbyist groups, some political groups, trying to use, as they mentioned on some Facebook comments, this window of opportunity, that how they call the war, to narrowing labor rights. It's what we tried to fight for the many years, and to help our partners to preserve the labor rights, the scope of labor rights and union rights in accordance of ILO standards and all other international standards. But some legislative initiatives, they came up. Like Ukrainian government, like we like to criticize government here. Like it's like national game, like to criticize government and to complain on everything. But in the first day of war, first months, and today it's 70-something day of the war, like people admire the Ukrainian government, and some folks, they're advocating anti-labor reform. They just undermining the efforts of the government in general. And in March, we had adopted the law. It was a law draft that was voted on the next day without consultations with unions and so on. That allows to narrow in a lot of labor rights. For example, it implements the notion of suspension of the labor agreement. It's kind of freezing. You're not formally fired, but you will not get your salary. Probably it should not be voted, because like people who preserve their jobs, they're trying to help Ukraine. And you see this peak of solidarity here. You should not force people to work 24/7. They will bake bread, wash the streets, and so on and so on. But if you're putting it in the legislative sphere, it's kind of a problem. And this freezing of labor agreements, we, like in the first day of it was submitted to the Verkhovna Rada, it's Ukrainian parliament, we are going that guys, like it will have a lot of abuse potential, because one issue, it's the enterprise that was bombed and ruined. Okay, nobody sane will ask for the normal conditions and so on. But if it's kind of coffee shop in the west of Ukraine that is relatively peaceful, it's a problem. And we already saw these problems. Ivana mentioned rail workers. We have a lot of suspensions of labor agreements on the rail. We had even attempts to suspend labor agreements, labor contracts with the employees of the Chernobyl nuclear power station when it was under the occupation. Kind of it will be like HBO series season 2, like if it will happen. Like Nova Poshta, I'll mention as a modern union, like 18,000 people were suspended. So it's very problematic that we have the kind of second front. We are not military people, but we are trying to preserve economy to work okay, and to preserve like human beings to have at least something. And unfortunately, some of these initiatives also appears like 2 weeks ago. Parliament tried to vote the law that will narrow in labor and union rights after the war, in the peaceful time, like priority on fixed-term contracts, removing rights of unions on coordinating dismissals, and so on and so on and so on. So we have this fight, but fortunately, Ukraine is a kind of democratic country, because I'm taking this phone with a Lifeline, trade union Lifeline logo, yeah, by the way, and I can write something on Facebook complaining that some MPs or lobbyist groups are not very good people and using this window of opportunity. But I'm not afraid that somebody from the security service will came to me and ask why I'm criticizing government. So we have this freedom, and that's because freedom and solidarity, it's the core values, not just our organization, but as was mentioned, that Ukraine is a one big union. That's why we're trying to sustain the freedoms and solidarity. And that's why we're involved in this labor law reforms, and we're trying to argue with government even in this situation. Seems now like we have some victories, some losses, but because we have such a great union leaders, like who some of them showed up like just when the war started, like we have these structures that we tried to build up before the war, and we're trying to sustain this feeling of solidarity that it will pass even after the war, and it will remain. Ordinary business, ordinary work, we're trying to do our best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, George. Let me follow up with one question. Since you, I don't think many Americans are aware of this, of the internal fight. You should call it the second front, I think you called it, to maintain labor rights, even within Ukraine in the midst of the war. But and you pointed to some anti-labor initiatives, rolling back gains that had been made for trade union rights and even contracts. But could you, what we hear is mainly following, it's the Zelensky and democracy against dictatorship and autocracy. There's a little bit of a contradiction then if the Ukrainian government could you talk briefly about the relation of the trade union movement to Zelensky and his government?
I will try to do it in 30 seconds. Kind of when you're reading articles on Washington Post or Guardian and so on, it's important. It's about like geopolitics, it's about presidents and so on and so on. But we're trying to emphasize one issue. It's people's agency. Like the agency of the ordinary people, and the unions are their representatives. So we're trying to emphasize it in our papers and in other materials. And there is no kind of, single relationships between the government and the trade unions because of differences and so on. But unions are fiercely fought against anti-labor reforms before the war, and trying to do their best to preserve the scope of labor rights we have now. So it's their nature; they should do it. Basically, they are receiving dues for this, I think the unions now they're playing a very crucial role, even kind of if, as you, Leon, said, that it's a fight between totalitarianism and democracy and so on, where inside this democracy should fuel this internal democracy, like criticizing our government if we are thinking arguably they're making something wrong, it's okay for us. It's our culture. We cannot do in the other way. So I think we'll have this new kind of civil society after the war, and it will also clean all those elements that were probably unnecessary and so on. But unions showed that they showed up in the first day of war. They trying to help people, and they trying to do not just humanitarian work, but also their main task, to preserve the people's earnings, to preserve their dignity, because of you may feel you may feel this dignity only when you have decent job, decent wages, and so on. Okay, we understand that under martial law and under the war, some of the human rights should be restricted, but we're trying to fight against any abuses of it.
Yeah.
That's
okay. Thanks, George. All right, we're going to move then finally to Kathy Feingold from the AFL-CIO and the International Trade Union Confederation. Kathy, can you give us some sense of how international unionism and solidarity plays into this conflict?
Sure. Good morning. Thanks so much for putting together this panel. Really, I want to build off of what we just heard from Ivana and from George. First of all, the importance of labor connections, I think George said, are really key to survival. They're key to a robust civil society and obviously democracy. And I cannot think of a better example than what is happening in Ukraine right now. Being able to use our local infrastructure as a labor movement to provide humanitarian support. We heard about Ivana's example of going to the train station on Easter. I actually have pictures of George dressed as an Easter bunny. You know, really finding creative ways to continue to be the glue of civil society. So taking what is happening locally and building that out globally. So how has the global labor movement responded? And I would say, again, building off of this concept of solidarity, it's been tremendous. So from the very first moment that the war began, the International Trade Union Confederation created funds that go directly to Ukrainian unions. So they had a fund that all of the affiliates collected, put resources into. The resources are being used both for directly to the unions that are identified by Al, as well as unions in neighboring countries. And I'll talk a little bit about that because they have been a critical part of the response infrastructure, right? Because we have so many people heading to Poland and to other countries. And it's the unions that have been on the front lines there as well. So the I2C funds are allowing the national trade unions to keep the shelters open, the boxes we see behind Ivana, that kind of humanitarian support, making sure that there's heat where people are seeking refuge. Partners in other countries like Romania have transported life-saving supplies like water, canned food, bedding, medications into Ukraine. The funds have also been used to provide food and water and shelter to the people who are making those journeys to deliver humanitarian aid in Ukraine. I know that our own, some of the labor leaders themselves have been traveling throughout the country to make sure that the infrastructure, the union infrastructure is moving. They're risking their own lives to make sure that they're meeting with partners. So from a global perspective, from the very first moment, the International Trade Union Confederation was there. They also set up, and I think it is still going, and people are encouraged to support it. They kind of had a GoFundMe link, and I can ask people to put that in the chat box. So the individuals. So we also collected resources from just individuals who wanted to make sure they could support unions in Ukraine. In terms of refugee support, partners in countries like Moldova and Poland have welcomed thousands of Ukrainian refugees, and again, making sure they have the resources they need. Imagine, we heard President Weingarten of the American Federation of Teachers just got back from Poland, and she was sharing with the AFL-CIO Executive Council yesterday just how many children, children that need to go to school, and just the immense pressure on these countries. So we are making sure, the labor movement is making sure that partners in Poland and Moldova have the support they need to welcome these refugee families. Other global union federations like UNI have set up projects in the region to provide materials, giving advice to refugees about their rights. We know what happens, and I think George got to this point. In terms of war and crisis, often there's an attempt to undercut labor rights and protections, right? There's questions about if Ukrainian refugees, making sure they have the same rights and protections in whatever country they're in. So they're not undercutting wages. They have strong wages so that they can provide for their families. There's a helpline, online services to answer questions for refugees that UNI has put up. Unions across Europe are using social dialogue. I saw that there was a question in the chat box about social dialogue that perhaps George or Ivana can talk about, but unions across Europe are using social dialogue to make sure that they're at the table shaping the policies that those governments are going to have in terms of how refugees are going to get integrated into the various countries and communities. We have seen what happens in different moments when refugees have come in, and it has led often to crises. So how can unions be part of the conversation from the beginning? The European Trade Union Confederation has issued advisory briefing notes about the actions of trade unions, their agreements and social dialogue outcomes. And so they're constantly updating the European Union, again, making sure unions are at the table. And the International Trade Union Confederation has established a framework for businesses to responsibly exit from Russia. That's a huge issue for purposes of respecting international labor rights and standards. So that's at the global level. And I know, Leanne, you asked also at the AFL-CIO at the national level, what's been happening. We immediately issued a statement condemning the invasion. We have a state federation and central labor council resolution template that many of our state federations and some central labor councils are passing. Unions in the US, including AFSCME and the American Federation of Teachers, two of our largest public sector unions, they passed resolutions calling for the divestment of pension fund investments with ties to Russia. So using their pension power to really put pressure on Russia. I already mentioned that AFT, the American Federation of Teachers President Weingarten, visited Poland last month, and again, working with them to figure out how we can continue to support the needs of refugees in particular. She highlighted the needs around education. And if I can't emphasize enough how our affiliates have come to the table giving financial support, local relief funds from AFT to United Auto Workers. I'm going to miss some if I even start naming them all. Steel workers, food and commercial workers. I mean, it's been tremendous. Theatrical Stage Employees Union also generous contributions. So really, we have seen this concept of solidarity coming together. I do want to mention something that we haven't talked about yet, Leon. So you have tremendous solidarity from the global labor movement, from the US labor movement. And let me just mention another labor movement that everyone needs to hear about, which is the labor movement in Belarus, which has played a critical role. As we know, the government of Belarus is aligned with Putin. And some of the bravest people, besides the people we have on the call today and the Ukraine unions, are our siblings in Belarus. There's an independent labor movement in Belarus, and they put out very critical statements of Putin at the beginning of the war. And this is, it's hard for some of us to really understand what that meant, right? I mean, to stand up not only to your own government, but to Putin, who was silencing everybody. And they have been struggling to even be an independent voice in Belarus for many years. On April 19th, more than 20 of those union leaders were arrested. It's clear they have been charged with organizing and preparing actions that grossly violate public order or active participation in them. This can lead to 4 years of prison. They are being held in KGB holding facilities, and that is not a good sign. We are all incredibly worried. This is probably the biggest attack we've seen on the independent trade union movement in Belarus in the last 30 years. So this is really important that people focus on this. When the name of the union, the BKDP leaders and members were attacked during the 2020 election, this led to the deregistration of this union. They called them extremist organizations. So they have faced repression for many years, but we are very concerned. So I do want to highlight, and I see that Al has put in the chat, the global campaign we have. So not only is it about resources to Ukraine, to neighboring unions, it is a global campaign right now to put pressure on governments to release these detained union leaders. And everyone is speaking out. We're all writing letters. We're making sure that those leaders are not forgotten and that we continue to fight for those spaces that George outlined, a free civil society, a labor movement that can continue to critique its government, fight for worker rights, fight against oppression, fight against war. And so this is so critical. So I think that's another important part of what is happening right now, making sure that the independent labor movement of Belarus isn't forgotten. My last point would be that we should not forget that in Russia as well, there's an independent labor movement that has also taken steps to be critical. Again, not easy within Russia, we all know this, but it's important to highlight the really important role that these independent labor movements have played, not only in these last months, but for years of creating really important spaces during times of incredible repression. And so continuing to make sure they have the needed support so that they can continue to build an independent workers' voice in these countries. So I think that, happy to talk more, but that really gives you a snapshot of what we're doing at the national, global level, both with Ukraine and with Belarus. And I know that we have some photos and the presentation that Ivana wanted to share with us. So back to you, Leon.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. And yeah, we'll like to pick up on some of Kathy's points, but first, Ivana, I know you have some pictures you wanted to show us earlier, so go ahead, please.
Yes, I'm so sorry. It was some problem with my PC, but it's a slide with photo about our youth network. It's especially our youth network. We have the Zoom meeting when war started because we want to decide what we have to do. So it's our people, and it's photo from Chernivtsi where we start from center and which we have had in Chernivtsi. And next one, yes, and next slide. Yeah, it's information about our how I said about our video statement to word about war. From our youth network and from our comrades from a nuclear trade union. Yes, so the next one is when we start to work in Kiev in our office together with George, with NGO Labor Initiative, and in this great office. Yes, next one, it's you can see the photo when we start to deliver our aid in the different city of Ukraine, in some hospitals, in our organization in Mykolaiv, like you see, Poltava, Shostka. In Shostka, we deliver very big humanitarian aid to hospitals, to children hospital, where was the children who moved on from east of Ukraine. And next one. And next one, we collect aid for people in Sumy, Zhytomyr, in Kalityanska Hromada, and also in Vyzhhorod. And like I mentioned, it was like you can see the kind of aid which we deliver. And next one. And next one, we collect the aid for our people in Bucha and the Borodyanka region. As you know, that it was a city with a very difficult situation, and like you saw, how people affect after Russia invasion. And next one, it's how we help evacuated people from the east of Ukraine and work with railway workers and help people in evacuated train. And next one, it's about our action Easter Spirit Go to the East, and some photo with elderly people which we helped. So yeah, it's my it's very short information about our work, and like all we said that and George said, now I hope that all of work from our youth network, it's like a new level of intersectoral solidarity of our trade union, because how we change our work and how we start work together from my comrades, my colleagues from different trade union, it show how our trade union can create new solidarity and new trade union work during this war. And I know like 100% that it's a result, it's very big result after great work of Solidarity Center and AFL-CIO and all of this event which we have, and all of information which we which we educated, and how we can change our mind. Now it helped us to do this work, and I hope we can change trade union movement and trade union work.
Thanks, Ivana. I have a question for Ivana and George, and possibly Al as well. You know, during this long period that we're still experiencing of the pandemic, of the COVID period, we heard a lot about essential workers. Who are the essential workers? Whether that was hospital and medical, or whether that was sanitation, or you know, or warehouse workers. This concept of essential workers, workers who were even more valuable than usual, and were sometimes rewarded as a result, or, you know, whether it was in the public, just general approval and recognition, or even economically rewarded. I'm just wondering, in a war situation, is there a different sense of who are the essential workers? And in Ukraine today, are some workers singled out as being more essential, and do they receive any official recognition in that way from the government?
Ivana, you or me?
Well, I would say initially, and I'll ask Ivana and Jora to expand on this, but I mean, if you look at categories like healthcare, agriculture, railways, the energy, coal mining, the energy power grid, you know, public utilities, like all of these groups, all of these workers are absolutely vital to keeping the country moving, you know, to keeping the country running, to keeping the lights on, and to keep things moving. So those are just sort of some general categories, sectors of workers that I know have been, you know, absolutely vital. We've talked a lot about railway workers. Ivana, George, anything to add to that?
George, you can start.
No. I would just suggest that let us take that under the war, all the workers are essential. And you know, like even some workers in the sectors that I felt like for what they are in the enterprises and so on, they are very vital. And yeah, some more, some less, but for example, like for me, like couriers delivery, like Glovo and so on, you may order burger by phone. It becomes very vital for people who are ordering medicine. So it's very changing. Or like utility services and so on and so on. So I think every worker in Ukraine is vital, and that's why we're trying to argue against some anti-labor reform, that all the workplace that we keep for the people, all the work, it's also the taxes on which we will buy the boots, the bullets, and so on for our soldiers. So every worker, even like, you know, I don't probably like some professions like IT who are coding like Battle of Tanks, like because I'm complaining they're paying less taxes than me. But they're all vital now, because either you're making something directly or you're paying taxes, supporting the economy, supporting the army, and you're working for the victory. Yeah.
Yeah. George, and I have a question for Ivana. You mentioned you did respond. You mentioned the importance of democratic rights of expression, and even of the unions being able to express themselves. You know, even in the midst of a wartime, even if there are some restrictions, that they should not. You know, they have to defend themselves against doing away with labor rights and that they've won through struggles. But could you be a little more specific about going back to Zelensky in this regard? I'd like to know, can you tell us what the relation of Zelensky and his government is to this issue of labor rights? Is there a direct conflict between the unions and Zelensky, or are they basically in a negotiating position where they're trying to work out these conflicts?
You know that it's very great question, and I want to mention that during the war, we, like George mentioned, we have some changes in our legislation area, but I think before the war, we against for our labor rights, and now we are fighting with Russia aggression, and after war, I hope that and I know we continue our fighting for decent work, for our salary, for a great work condition, and all of this discussion which we have now in political area. I know that the position of trade union will be safe place and safe people during this war. Maybe George, like lawyer, can add some.
Oh yeah, you know, like it's we have a joke that if we have some guy that come into our house and trying to steal something, to kill somebody, even if we have some disputes and so on, we will unite, and then after we will put him out. Like we will drink vodka and then beat each other faces, and we will solve all the issues. So it's not a problem here in Ukraine just to arguing and discussing. It's a problem of some groups that are very forcing and very aggressive in the sense of kind of labor reforms, despite even business like with which we were speaking, they are not interested in such atrocious labor reform. It's just for some abuse, some corruption abuse and so on. That's why we're again emphasizing the role of unions about like anti-corruption and so on, because like in the public sectors there are some law drafts that will allow that they have some corruption risks and so on, and just unions fighting against it. So we cannot speak about some kind of broad picture about like Zelensky and the unions. It's very ad hoc. It's very ad hoc, but we have this treasure. We have the space for discussion even now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Kathy, could I ask you? You talked about this whole network of union organizations across the West pitching in together. Where in Ukraine or outside are they finding the biggest, if any, are finding any resistance to these efforts at support and solidarity? Or is this a kind of uncommon consensus that's enveloping labor, across the world?
Well, I think that there is definitely a consensus. I don't think there's any question about supporting unions in Ukraine. That's from Latin America. We were just at a meeting of the Trade Union Advisory Committee, Trade Union Confederation of the Americas, with unions from Chile to Canada. Everyone is unanimous in support for Ukraine. So I don't think we're seeing any resistance to speaking out about the need for humanitarian aid, for funds. Obviously, we always have robust debates within the labor movement about geopolitics. So that is alive and well. But in terms of what we just talked about here with the humanitarian support, there really is no huge debate. I think there's going to be big questions about what next. How do we get to peace? How do we get to rebuilding in a way that doesn't undermine workers and unions? Because I think that is something we often see, right? That in negotiating negotiations. When chaos, I think Naomi Klein says, when chaos or shock happens, they often take advantage to try to weaken labor protections and unions. And so I think we all need to be focused on that point. We're already seeing it happening as they're trying to weaken labor laws. So I think there's going to be lots more for us to be doing, to be focused on, to take the lead from our siblings in Ukraine about what's important to them. But really, I think we're united. I want to just I see Ben has posted a couple questions. I just wanted to make sure folks see we have responded about KTR, the independent Russian movement. Rudy Porter has posted 2 articles about their important work and the oppression they face in Russia. Ben has asked about contact. I would recommend, and I've asked if Rudy Porter could put in the organization that George works with is doing fabulous updates. A newsletter, I think it happens. Okay, if anybody that would like it, you can get Labor Initiative's newsletters. I find that is the best way I'm staying updated, in addition to a WhatsApp chat that I am honored to be a part of and get daily updates about what's happening. So really, I think you see real unity, Leon, about what's happening in terms of the need to support workers in Ukraine, refugees in the various countries. But we know as time goes on, there's going to be a lot of other important questions, right? How do we integrate refugees? How do we use our power as unions to make sure their rights are upheld? So there's a lot of work that still has to be done, but I'm really proud of the unity that we have built during this moment, and obviously the work that's happening on the ground.
Mm-hmm. Are the unions in Ukraine, even in the midst of war, thinking about initial post-war moves, especially rebuilding? Clearly, it's going to have to be huge investment in infrastructure and rebuilding. Do the unions have their own vision of how that can take place?
Do you want Ivana or George? I would just say from a global perspective and then hand it over to them. I mean, I think that's where we all need to be very focused and concerned, right? How does rebuilding happen? Who helps shape the priorities of rebuilding? Under what work conditions? Lots of people are concerned about I think Al put in the initial slide, the just transition. There was work being done, transitioning off of fossil fuels. What kind of economy gets rebuilt along? Is it a green economy? So there'll be lots to discuss, and I think that is a lot of the work that we need to make sure we do to have unions at the table shaping the next steps. But over to Georgia and Ivana and others.
I hope that our victory will be is very near, and after victory we have a lot of work for rebuilding our country, for rebuilding our trade union work, and for building new kind of work. And all of we have a lot of tasks, and like Katie mentioned, it's just transition. It's our regional, it's called there are a lot of work, but I hope that after victory, our country, together with international solidarity, with international support, can build our new, strong and democracy in Ukraine, and strong trade union movement.
I might jump in for just 2 seconds. We share the roles. Ivana is very optimistic. I'm rather pragmatic. That the problem's still here, and we understand that even with this rebuilding, hopefully this horrible war will end soon. We will have a lot of money that came to Ukraine, and unions will be these watchdogs that will look and see how it should be spent. Yeah, and that's why we're arguing for against anti-labor reforms, because if you will have a retaliation after you're exposing some stuff and so on, so it's kind of for us, the labor movement will be also not just for securing people's lives, daily lives, but it will be also the preservance that all this aid that came from US, from Europe, and so on, and for which we're extremely grateful, that it will be spent in the righteous way.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I think that gives us a kind of good summary conclusion. I think we've covered a lot of important topics, by no means exhausting the subject, but we're so grateful to Ivana and George for joining us and sharing a bit of what the daily struggle looks like, as well as the longer term prospects, and Al for giving us a sense of the centrality of the Solidarity Center and international organizations, as well as US, that Kathy represents. We'll end on this note, but thank everyone for joining the webinar. It is recorded and will be available, and we'll continue the discussion and the struggle. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.